Hey guys, this is Rudy coming at you live from Palm Beach in Florida. It is early March. I've been away, as you probably would have realized, for the past 5 weeks or so. Visited a few countries, stayed in about 10 hotels, had about 6 flights. Anyway, I'm back and I got some catching up to do. A couple of people on the channel have asked me some questions. So Raphael just posted a question and said, is it time to buy UUUU, which is energy fuels? That depends on your level of risk tolerance, Raphael. It's probably not a bad time to get into energy fuels because it's trading really low. From a risk mitigation point of view, I'd say firstly, you don't jump in boots and all. And secondly, you might want to take a look at Cameco as well. Cameco is a much more stable business and certainly much more predictable. It's down about 35% off its highs. So maybe a mix between the two. Otherwise, if you want to go with a more high risk option, energy fuels may not be too bad. Adam also asked for an update on energy, including some of the stocks I covered before I went and left on business and vacation. And that includes some of the stocks I talked about before, like XLE and Exxon, Phillips 66, Occidental, etc. I'll do that next. So after this video has posted and it's live, I'll catch up on energy. I need to catch up anyway because all hell broke loose since I've been away, with the new president stepping in and pretty much jumping in boots and all and changing everything. And then Tony asked about tariffs, and what I really want to do is just spend a few minutes to talk about tariffs and discuss sort of the proverbial elephant in the room because it impacts and affects us all. Tariffs, of course, is nothing new. Uh, these are things that have been around forever, and I'm going to take you on a short little trip down memory lane in just a second. Let me just get some of this stuff out the way. This little cartoon dates back to 1913. The image source is the Library of Congress, and it was a political cartoon that depicted the impending end of tariffs used to protect U.S. domestic monopolies. Many people say, what are tariffs? Some people say, how do they work? And of course, the most important question for us as investors is, how will it impact my investments? What I'm going to try and do as best I can for this particular video is refrain from making any political statements and rather take you on a little walk down memory lane and then just explain tariffs in general so that we can all get an understanding exactly of how this works and what it actually means and what it is. So the first thing we want to do is ask the question and answer it. What is a tariff and what is its function? A tariff is placed on goods when they cross national borders, right? So in other words, when something is imported or exported, import tariffs are taxing goods brought into a country. Export tariffs are very, very rare. In fact, the United States doesn't even allow it under the Constitutional Article 1, Section 9. It's forbidden. Tariffs can be used for protection or revenue purposes, right? These two are two different things. What you might want to do, for instance, from a United States perspective, is to say, I want to protect my motor vehicle manufacturers, so people like Ford and General Motors, by placing tariffs on people who make motor vehicles in other countries, like let's say Japan, Toyota and Honda, as an example. Or otherwise, it's for revenue purposes. Every time somebody imports something, we charge them some tariffs, which really is just a fancy word for a tax. In some jurisdictions, they're also called duties or tax and excise duties or whatever. So different jurisdictions have different names for them. But a tariff in real terms is basically just a tax. It's for protection or revenue purposes. So by way of a quick example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this little gadget here. And this is a product that I imported before, so I'll take you back to the presentation in just a minute. The actual product looks like this. It's called a lens pen. And for those of you who are too young to know what a camera is, this particular thing in my hand right now is a camera lens. And what happens sometimes is you accidentally smudge the lens by making a fingerprint on the lens. You probably can't see it from this particular viewpoint that you have. But this little gadget that I have here has a little brush so I can actually clean the lens, so wipe any dust off it. And in the cap on the other side, I have a carbon compound, looks like so. And I twist the cap and I can take the lens in my hand and I can clean the camera lens, all nice and shiny and new. And this particular little product is called a lens pen, right? So the reason why I'm showing you that is because it's the most simplistic example that I can think of in terms of just showing you sort of how tariffs work. So when one of my businesses was importing this particular product, which at the time was made in mainland China, my cost as the importer was $3 per unit FOB. FOB means free on board. In other words, that's sort of my net cost from the manufacturer. And then if I'm just rounding here, but if I had to say on a per unit basis, they cost me sort of 30 cents to ship. And then I had to pay a 10% tariff, which is approximately 30 cents again, which means my total cost per unit is approximately $3.60. I would then wholesale it for, let's say, times two, $7.20, and retailers would sell it for whatever they want, typically sort of $9.99, $12.99. In fact, you can buy a lens pen, which is the name of the product, on websites like Amazon today, and probably pay about $9.99 or $12.99. So the price hasn't really changed much over the years since I first imported this product, which dates back all the way to 1998. Can you believe it? Probably some people watching this video weren't even born in 1998. So the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because in this particular example, the government was charging me a 10% tariff, which is tax, right? So one example, as I said a minute ago, is to protect local industry. Now, in that particular instance, this doesn't apply because there was no local industry manufacturing something like this. And on the other hand, you could say it's to generate revenue. So this is just pure revenue, which is tax. So they effectively were charging me 10% on every single unit, which is 30 cents. But if you multiply by hundreds of thousands, suddenly it's a lot of money. And it's just an additional tax. That tax or tariff gets passed on to the consumer ultimately, because when they buy at retail from a retail shop, it already includes the tariff fee that I raised as the importer on the price of the product. Now, there are different ways in which organizations and exporters and importers will manage this in some way. Let's say, for instance, if the sort of psychological ceiling on the product was $9.99, I might say I'll just eat the tariff and I won't build it into my price model, and I'll work on a base price of or cost basis of $3.30 instead of $3.60. In other words, I'll just take the hit on that one. Or otherwise, I might do it at wholesale level, or as I said, it could be done at retail level. But in simple terms, that's a tariff. 10% in this example on a per unit basis for every unit that is imported. How long have tariffs been around? So for much longer than you and I, because in fact, in the United States, they've been in place since 1789, when the United States was still a very, very young country, right? So it's been around for centuries. In 1900, tariffs accounted for more than 41% of US government income, but by 2013, that number had fallen to just 2%. So this delta that you have here is actually one of the things that President Trump is trying to address. It's a twofold thing, because he's basically saying, on one hand, that the US has been ripped off for many, many years. His words, not mine. And he wants to sort of correct that. On the other hand, he's basically saying that the US government is foregoing a lot of revenue. And as a result, taxes on individual people have just gone up and up and up and up. And as the individual income taxes have gone higher, you could say, well, with a 39% delta between where we were 100 years ago and today, if we could actually generate more revenue from tariffs, we could, in theory anyway, cut taxes. And cutting personal income tax is actually one of President Trump's mission statements in terms of what he's trying to do. While the revenue-raising role of tariffs has diminished, they have made a comeback for protectionist purposes, right? So I gave you an example of that, for instance, with the car manufacturers just a minute ago, when I said, in order, for instance, to protect US car manufacturers, we may want to raise tariffs against motor vehicles that are manufactured in other jurisdictions or across the border. So I won't keep you for too long on this one, but let's take a quick trip down memory lane, right? In 1930, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. Months later, in 1930, President Hoover signed the Smoot-Hawley Act into law. The law was originally aimed at imposing tariffs to protect U.S. farmers from foreign competition, but it was extended to a wider array of products and increased tariffs on agricultural and industrial goods of about 20%, right? So we're charging a tax on agricultural products made elsewhere. In 1960s, there was a chicken war, right? So during World War II, from 1939 to 1945, red meat was rationed. The US ramped up factory farming of chicken, which lowered the price of poultry, right? This is a basic, simple supply and demand quotation. Um, Effectively, what you're doing is you're saying by increasing the supply, we were able to lower the price. The period after World War II saw the acceleration of globalization. Europe started buying cheap chicken from the United States, and as a result, European farmers were scared of being priced out of the market with fast, inexpensive American chickens. So they raised tariffs, right? In 1982, the lumber war between the United States and Canada, the US was convinced that it could see the wood through the trees. The root of the conflict was the fact that Canada grows and harvests lumber from public land with prices determined by the government. Canada is an interesting mix of socialist, capitalist type of enterprises. So in Canada, for example, in addition to the example I'm sharing with you right now about harvesting lumber from public land with prices determined by the government, effectively there's no price competition on a variety of different products, including, for instance, gasoline. In Canada, they'll all post their prices, but the prices are pretty much the same. Or, for instance, on a local level, provincially, all the liquor stores are owned by the provinces, so they're government owned, which is just another form of tax and tariffs. On the other hand, the United States harvests lumber from privately owned lots. So in 1982, a few years ago, they had this lumber war between the United States and Canada. I talked about tariffs on Japanese automobiles a minute ago. In 1987, President Reagan imposed 100% tariffs, 100% tariff, double the price, on $300 million worth of Japanese imports, affecting in particular automobiles from the East Asian nation. Right at the bottom of the screen here, it says Japan did not retaliate. Hoping to prevent this issue from causing severe damage to the world's free trading system, the Japanese government decided from this broader perspective not to take any retaliatory measures immediately, which is different from today. You see President Trump threatening to impose and then imposing tariffs against Canada and Mexico. And Mexico, I'm not too sure about as I speak right now, but for sure in Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau immediately responded with reciprocal tariffs. And many of the premiers, including Doug Ford from Ontario, is making a lot of noise in terms of saying this is going to cost America a lot of money and it's going to cost America jobs. In other words, retaliation is the name of the game today. 1993, there was a banana split. In 1993, soon after the European Union was formed, the bloc placed tariffs on bananas from Latin American countries to give their small farmers in its former Caribbean and African colonies an upper hand in the market. Protectionist, right? The Steel War, 2002, to boost the American steel industry, President George W. Bush placed tariffs ranging from 8 to 30% on steel from foreign countries. Mexico and Canada were exempt from this, but it hit Europe, right? So it's not only easily applied, but it's also selectively applied, once again, depending on whether it's protectionist or revenue generating. But these things have been going on for years and years and years, in fact, for centuries. Who pays a tariff and who benefits from it? Well, I gave you an example just a minute ago when I shared my personal example with the little product called LensPen, but the importer bringing the goods into the country usually pays a tariff. That's the most simple way in which it works, and the payment occurs when the goods enter the country. So when the goods enter the country, the shipping agent or the clearing agent will give you a statement and say, and basically they'll say, this is the cost of the product, this is the cost of the shipping, this is the cost of clearing it, customs and excise duty or tariffs or whatever. They'll add up all that stuff and they'll say this is what you owe, which includes the tariff on the product that you imported into the country. The impact of the tariff depends on whether the country imposing it is large or small in terms of its ability to influence world prices via tariffs. Now, the reason why I added this here is because in my example, this doesn't impact anyone at all other than the consumer who might want to use the product. But there's two examples here. If you take these two countries, they are very, very different one from the other. Vietnam is geographically very small, but it's the world's third largest coffee exporter. The largest one is Brazil. The second largest one is Colombia. And then Vietnam is third. So its trade policies when it comes to coffee creates a large open commodity economy. On the other hand, Russia is a very, very large country in relative close proximity to Vietnam, but it has this very small open economy for coffee trade. And the reason why I'm mentioning coffee is because outside of oil and gas, coffee is sort of the most highly traded commodity in second place behind oil globally, right? So it's a big product. So if the United States, for example, had to impose tariffs on Vietnam coffee, the entire world will be paying more for coffee. So where do you find information about this and how does it work? So what they have is a harmonized system, and this is pretty much an international thing. So I've gone here onto the official website of the International Trade Administration in the United States, but you can look up HS codes wherever you are and wherever you might be domiciled in the world. And this global classification system is something that you require if you're importing and exporting products. So here's another practical example. So one of my companies is buying from another company called Ground Cover Leather Company shoes. And for people who are not familiar with Western products like shoes, let me just show you sort of what this looks like. So this is a shoe. This is a handmade shoe, and it's ground cover leather, but it's actually suede. So these are blue suede shoes, kind of like Elvis used to wear when who the heck is Elvis, right? So most of you are too young to know Elvis, I guess, as well. But anyway, so here's a clearing instruction just by way of an example. So this is my company. The supplier is ground cover. Here's my customs code, so I can look it up, HS640420. It will tell me the most common importing companies in the United States using this code are companies you might be familiar with, like Steve Madden, Adidas, Fila. And then you can also see the top suppliers using this particular code, Damco Vietnam, Fila Sport, etc. So this helps you in a variety of different ways, because if you wanted to actually custom design a shoe, you could effectively approach Damco Vietnam, because you see that they're one of the largest suppliers using this code, and you can say, will you make a shoe for me? And then that way you can have a customized shoe that is specific and unique to yourself and that no one can really copy unless it becomes super popular, in which case they'll just steal your design. But here at the bottom of the screen, you can see that this particular commodity also attracts a 10% increase if the individual article is worth more than $2.50 per unit, which it is and which it was. Now, on this one, unlike my previous example about the lens pen, it's a little different, because there are a lot of people who would argue and say that shoes or clothing, much like food, is a necessity. And to charge tariffs or taxes on things like clothing probably is less desirable, or perhaps even shouldn't be allowed. But I'm not here to make a judgment call on that. I'm just sharing information with you, and you can kind of figure it out as you go along for yourself. On the left-hand side here, you can see all the different things that they're going to bill me for before the products arrive. But the main thing I want to pay attention to here is the tariff, which is customs code HS640420, which is an extra 10% on the cost of my product. Now, when a large open economy, remember I talked about Vietnam and Russia, imposes a tariff, several effects happen, right? So what happens here, consider the case, in this case, the example of the United States imposing a tariff on coffee imports. Higher prices for imported coffee. This is going to impact every single consumer who likes to drink coffee, which is probably most of the people watching this video, at least from time to time. The price of imported coffee rises, so it's increasing to the importer, therefore it's increasing to the wholesaler, therefore it's increasing to the retailer, and the consumer pays more money, making it more expensive for U.S. consumers and businesses, including businesses like coffee shops. Now, the terms of the trade gain is an interesting concept, right? Because the United States is a large open economy, the tariff can reduce the world price of coffee. So even though the tariff has been applied, foreign producers like those in Vietnam might lower their prices in order to retain access to the large US market. So I kind of briefly mentioned that, right? I might just eat the cost of the tariff in order to ensure that my product can still sell through into the market. Otherwise, I might end up being stuck with it. In the case of Vietnam, as the world's third largest coffee producer, they might say, you know what, we'll just decrease the prices to our distributors and wholesalers and even direct retailers right across the globe in order to eat the tariff so that we still have access to this large US market. Reduced trade volume is another byproduct of this. the volume of coffee traded will decrease because higher prices reduce US demand for imported coffee, right? So as the price of coffee goes up, you might decide to drink less and less and less coffee, or otherwise forego it altogether and just start drinking beer instead, right? Who is adversely affected by that tariff and how, right? So in a large open economy such as the United States, the effects of tariffs are mixed. Consumers are generally negatively impacted by higher prices. This impacts every single one of us. However, the domestic industry is protected by the tariff, such as in this example, US coffee producers, or like I mentioned before, motor vehicle manufacturers, automobile manufacturers, benefits because they are being able to sell more of their product to the local consumers because it's available at a lower price. Using that earlier example that I shared of Ronald Reagan imposing tariffs of 100% on Japanese automobile manufacturers, regardless of what the price was. If the price of a Toyota doubled, you might be more inclined to buy a Ford, for example, if you lived in the United States. Of course, the government also benefits by collecting additional revenue from the tariffs, because at the end of the day, tariff is, as I said at the start, just a fancy word for tax. What I want you to do is not to confuse the concept of a tariff versus inflation and versus price, right? So I've already said a few times a tariff is a tax, but don't conflate these issues and just assume that if President Trump imposes tariffs on whatever, therefore prices will just go up and inflation will just go through the roof. So one of the people on X that I follow, James Altucher, he made this comment here. He said, during the COVID lockdowns, nobody needed gasoline because nobody was driving. The price of oil literally went to zero. It actually went negative for a while. Zero demand for gasoline, too much supply, so the price went down. And then he says 40% of all the money printed in history was printed between 2020 and 2022 during COVID. So the fastest increase in inflation in US history happened shortly after. In this chart, you can see inflation spiked after money was printed, right? So what he's doing here is he's giving you a breakdown between tariffs, which are taxes, and price based on supply and demand, and inflation, right? So the most inflationary thing we can do is to print more money. Price, at the end of the day, remains a byproduct of supply and demand. Ultimately, that's the main thing that impacts price. And that's also why I added this particular slide into this presentation here, because leading oil producing countries worldwide in 2023, so just a couple of years ago, the United States has, as President Trump likes to say, far more liquid black gold than anybody else. And you can see the United States is almost equal to the next two combined, which is Saudi Arabia and Russia. And when Trump says drill, baby, drill, what President Trump is basically doing is he's asking for increased production. Increased production leads to increased supply, and increased supply, which is not necessarily commensurate with increased demand, will lead to an oversupply and a price that goes down. Now, I haven't done the energy video yet in order to catch up and to give people like Adam an update on where we are with energy. But when I do that, I will spend a little bit of time looking at this and look specifically at the impact that the tariffs that have been imposed by President Trump has impacted energy as a whole in terms of our portfolio, and see what it does from an energy point of view in terms of where we are today. So in a nutshell, that's sort of an overview on tariffs. Tariffs are just taxes. And at the end of the day, the most critical question related to the taxes is who pays the taxes. And ultimately, the answer to that is pretty much everybody, except to a degree, the local producers. So if you are a local farmer or your local car manufacturer using President Trump's philosophy or his narrative, then your product should be more desirable and cheaper for American consumers to purchase because there's no tariffs against local manufacturing, because he wants to bring back manufacturing to the United States of America. Of course, nothing precludes other countries, including large buying nations like Europe, or to a lesser degree, smaller buying nations like Canada or Mexico, who also consume American products, from imposing reciprocal tariffs or taxes, right? So it's possible that you might enjoy a benefit in terms of increased manufacturing and increased production and lower prices from local manufacturing in the United States. But in a global world, that narrative is a little bit more complex than what I have the ability to share in a 20, 25-minute video. Anyway, that's tariffs. And I hope for the sake of you watching this, if you're still watching right now, that it's been beneficial to at least someone somewhere. Thanks for watching. Take care. I'll be back soon with an energy update. And until then, take care of yourself and stay safe. Bye-bye.